Hello everybody and welcome to another video tutorial. Now for today's tutorial I'm actually going to be showing you how I took all the components of my online computer, which is it's a pretty old computer, but it was a pre-built computer and I didn't really like the aesthetics of it, and it wasn't very functional on the inside as well. Everything was really cramped, it was difficult to work with and make modifications. So I took the components from that one and placed it inside a new case. Now this case was actually really cheap, it was a $50 case, so if I do need to upgrade it, it's easier to work with, and I don't have to worry too much about it. Now as you can see, I'm going through and I'm just carefully trying to remove all the pins. The hardest pin I found to remove was definitely the power supply cord that goes from your power supply to the motherboard, the main cord for that. It took a lot of time actually just to pry that loose. Now this is a sped up video, so you're seeing it much faster. Now the way this case is set up though, it's actually really, like, the base of it is actually really well designed, because I was actually able to use this case for my mom, because my mom had 2 extra hard drives and I had some leftover components from her old computer that I combined with a really archaic computer that I no longer use. So I used those components and I was able to pop those in no problem, and now she has another working desktop PC, which is really nice. So as you can see, this is the inside of the new case. Now what I did is I took a piece of paper and drew out the holes so that I would know where to place the standoffs. The standoffs are really important because they essentially keep your computer from shorting out. So it's something I wanted to make sure was properly placed. I do generally find that the most difficult part in building a computer is actually placing inside the motherboard. It does require some finessing. And also, for the motherboard, there's this plate so that everything lines up. You have the labeling as well. That took actually probably the longest in this case, because this case is actually really amazing. It has plenty of room for the motherboard. The motherboard that I had in my old case was, it wasn't too big, so it wasn't a huge issue. So as you can see, I'm just making sure I line everything up. Before I attach any screws, I do a rough fit, just to make sure everything's placed properly. And then it's just a case of essentially slowly adding in the screws afterwards. You do have to take a little bit of time to make sure all the components are actually properly placed inside the panel as well. But other than that, it's actually pretty simple. Most of the cables only fit in one slot. There's really only one cable you have to watch out for. Once again, it's for the power supply. In this case, I didn't have to worry about it because I believe it was a 4 instead of a 6-pin connector. And because of that, it was kind of obvious which connection was required. So it wasn't a huge issue. So a big thing about this is you want to always double check your components to make sure they work too. What I actually found was necessary as well is, I don't show it in this video, but essentially I actually had to go in afterwards and remove my RAM sticks, wait about 2 to 3 minutes, then plug it back in, put it back on the power, and that actually fixed up most of my boot issues. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. So if I do this in the future, what I'm probably actually going to do is I'm probably going to remove my RAM sticks for sure, just to alleviate that entire issue altogether, and also remove my graphics card, which I did do anyway. I did remove my graphics card before actually putting the components in here. So once I was sure about where the parts went into the case, I actually started doing a bit of cable management as I went. So this essentially is a rough fit right now, so I want to find out where the cables are coming from, how big they are, and I'm checking the power supply. The initial power supply that I was going to put in, actually the cable wasn't long enough for one of my main wires, so I couldn't place it in. I had to actually use my old power supply from a really old computer instead, but it worked. It had just enough voltage for it. So as long as I don't decide to try to overclock it, I should be fine. But it barely has enough voltage for this build. So that's something you might want to keep in mind as well. So I may eventually replace the power supply but by that point I might actually replace the components entirely. And I can just reuse the case because I really like the case. I bought the case because I knew I was going to reuse it. It's so much easier with a ratchet. I have a tiny ratchet too, which makes it even easier. Essentially I do the rough assembly and then I go in and I start cable managing everything, which is what I'm doing right now, which is why you can't see too much of it. But I'll go back and forth and check to see if there's a better way to cable manage what I already have, because I'm not adding extensions or anything like that. I'm just trying to work with what I currently have. So working with the SATA cables now for my hard drive. Once again, you end up with a lot of cables, and if you don't cable manage these, what happens is it becomes very difficult to close the case. So that's just one reason why you want to do definitely some really nice cable management if you can. Sometimes it's not always possible depending on the cables. So essentially you can see the cables on this side here as I'm turning it, but inside it's actually fairly clean considering the type of cables. I don't have a modular power supply, so it's not as easy to cable manage it. But overall I was pretty happy with the build. The computer works great, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so thank you and take care.